The armored centaur warrior thunders across the battlefield, sending his enemies flying with swings from his warhammer and kicks from his hooves. Welcome to D&D build number 20, a build I'm titling Crushing Hooves. And yes, this is going to be a monk build primarily that's going to wear armor, actually. And then as just kind of a special thing for our 20th build video, I'm going to make this character for a potential Mystic Odysseys of Theros campaign. And so everywhere that you see this little Mystic Odyssey of Theros kind of tag up there, that's content that's specifically going to be for a Theros setting. But that said, this build is going to be fine and work perfectly well and still be fun, even if you don't use any of that content. So here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to do a little announcement, but then there's going to be our normal introduction and build concept. Then I'll talk about the character build from level 1 to level 17, and each of our key breakpoints, so level 6, level 9, level 13, and level 17, we're going to do a damage report and kind of talk about what the tactics of this character are going to be. Then we'll summarize and kind of talk about the character as a whole. And this character in particular is going to be a damage per round character, although they will have some burst potential and a fair amount of control and utility potential as well. So first, an announcement. As of the time that I'm filming this video, the channel is currently at 188 subscribers. And when we get to 200, my goal is to do a special video. So if you like the content and are interested, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any content. The plan for the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my cute dog. You may have seen her in previous videos, or at least her tail as she hops off my lap. She likes to couch surf when I record, oddly. But we're going to do a fun build using the sidekick rules out of Tasha's. So that video I'm going to make once we hit 200. So stay tuned. It might happen in the next month. But yeah, just a little announcement there. All right, so introduction and build concept for the Crushing Hooves character. This is going to be a defensive and very mobile sustained damage dealer. They're going to have a variety of force movement and single target control options, and this is going to be a strength-based, primarily monk character who's going to wear armor with a shield. Now this does disable some of the monk features, but the ones that I actually want to use work just fine. So I'll talk a little bit as we go about how a strength armor monk kind of works. But that's something I want to do for this character because I think it's an interesting concept. It's not necessarily super optimal, but it is an alternate and I think viable way to actually play a monk if you do it right. This character is also going to have a solid background for role-playing and fitting into a variety of campaign settings, not just a Theros campaign. And so the books that you will need for this build, you will need the Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for the core build, as well as potentially Monsters of the Multiverse if you want to use the race I'm going to use. And if you're going to have any of the Mystic Odysseys of Theros content, you probably will want that book. So let us jump into level 1 for this character, and we are going to be beginning our career as a fighter. Once again, I do this quite often, and there's some pretty specific reasons for this. So, as a fighter, we get proficiency with all armor and shields, as well as simple and martial weapons. We get to pick a fighting style, and I'm going to pick the dueling fighting style on this character. What this does is it gives you a +2 bonus to damage rolls with a weapon that you're wielding in one hand, so long as your other hand isn't holding a weapon. So you can do a weapon and a shield and still qualify for benefit. We also get the second wind feature, so as a bonus action, once per short rest, we can heal ourselves for 1d10 plus our fighter level. This is often best to use as a either in combat as a quick heal or before you take a short rest so you get the resource back. One of the other things about this character is that we are going to be primarily a short rest based character. Just about all of our resources are going to come back on a short rest. So make sure, especially if your party takes short rests often after combat, this will actually be a character that will be very effective for that. That said, make sure to budget your short rest resources based on how frequently your party actually gets short rests. As a first level fighter, also, we get proficiency in strength saves and constitution saves. Now, for our race today, I'm going to be using the Centaur out of Monsters of the Multiverse. Now, if you're doing a Theros campaign, the races in the Theros setting are relatively limited, and so the Centaur is one of them. There's one other racial option that will work, but I wanted to use this one in particular here, and there's a few reasons why. So first, just kind of what does the Centaur get? So the first thing is the Centaur is actually a Fey creature type. So you're not actually a humanoid, which means that spells that target humanoids, like say hold person, don't actually affect you. And so there can actually be some interesting defensive benefits from being a Fae, although you are vulnerable to certain other things. Another unique thing about them is that they have a 40-foot base movement speed. No dark vision, but that is okay. And then for other racial features, they have the charge feature. So this is a pretty cool feature, and I'm actually planning on using it kind of tactically on this build. What this does, if you move at least 30 feet in a straight line at an enemy or hitting them with an attack, you can make a bonus action attack with your hooves. And so this is a way that this race can get an on-demand bonus action attack, which is pretty nice. They also have the equine build feature. This basically increases their carrying capacity, but it also, instead of climbing at half speed, they climb at a quarter speed because they're half horse. Interesting thing, and by the end of this character, we'll actually be able to get around this in a rather funny way. And then the centaur can use their hooves as a natural, as an unarmed strike, and their unarmed strikes with the hooves do 1d6 bludgeoning damage plus their strength modifier. Now, one of the things with Monk, as this again is going to be a melee Monk character, is that if you wear armor or use a shield, you can't use the Monk's martial arts feature, which normally overrides the base damage of 1 with your unarmed strikes. But because we are a race that has a natural unarmed strike ability, we're actually going to be able to still make those unarmed strikes, even though we can't use the martial arts feature and thus won't qualify for the free bonus action attack from that. We can still use our hooves for eventual things like Monk's Flurry of Blows. And finally, centaurs have the natural affinity feature, which gives them an extra skill proficiency and a nature aligned skill. Another race option here is going to be the satyr. This is another race that is in the Theros campaign setting. And importantly, they also have a bludgeoning unarmed attack they can make with their horns. And they've got a nice magic resistance feature and are a little faster than normal at 35 feet. And if you wanted to play a satyr for a build like this, 100% could do that. It's probably the second best option and might be a little bit better defensively, but you don't have kind of the charge and fun things that I like about the centaur. So hence I wanted to go with centaur for this build. Centaurs also can use some potentially interesting magic items, which I will talk about at our level 6 breakdown. For our starting stats, we are using the point buy method as always. So I'm going to get a 15 in strength and put our +2 there for a total of 17. I'm going to get a 13 dex, even though we're not going to be wearing light armor or medium armor or even going unarmored. We need 13 dexterity minimum to qualify to be a monk. And also won't hurt to have a decent dexterity save if we want to be durable. I'm gonna take a 14 Constitution for hit points, and then a 13 with our +1 in Wisdom. And again, we need a minimum of 13 Wisdom to be a monk, but it'll actually be kind of nice to have a reasonable Wisdom score on this character. This leaves you with 1 point left over, so I'll just put it in Intelligence, but you can kind of put it wherever you want. And if you're rolling for stats, priority should generally be your highest in Strength, and then make sure that you have at least 13 Dex, and then try to get as high Constitution as possible, and at least 13, if not more. All right. For our starting hit points, therefore, we have 12, so 10 from being a fighter, plus our 2 from our Constitution. For our starting equipment, we want to take the items offered by our class. So we're going to take a warhammer, a shield, a couple of hand axes, and some chainmail. Potentially try to get a component pouch along your travels, although it's not strictly necessary. And we want to mainly go for bludgeoning type weapons on this character, and a warhammer and potentially light hammers might be things you want to use down the line. So think about that. All right. Also, if we're going to do Mystic Odysseys of Theros, we get a supernatural gift and potentially a god that we serve here at level 1. So for our supernatural gift, they say you might be able to take some feats if you talk with your DM. I'm not going to do that. We're going to take the Heroic Destiny supernatural gift. This gives us 2 features. The first one is Defy Death, so we get advantage on death saves, and then Hard to Kill. If we are reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright, we can drop to 1 hit point instead, and we can do this once per long rest. So those will just make us extra resilient and very hard to kill, and that's one of the goals I actually have for this build in particular. For the god that we serve, honestly, you can pick all kinds of different ones. There isn't, from my review, any particular god that you can be a champion of that is going to have a super high impact on your build. The top 3 I have for this character mechanically are Heliod, Nylena, and Mogus. But that said, I feel like with the RP and story I envision of this character, Heliod probably fits best. And I'm going to assume that we gain 1 piety per session on average. That's what the book says you should get. And then I'm going to assume an average of 4 sessions per level. So we'll get 4 piety per level. I understand that in a normal campaign, your progression is going to vary wildly. Some campaigns you progress through levels pretty fast. Sometimes it might take 8 to 10 sessions in order to gain a level. That's a slow campaign, by the way. But honestly, whatever pace your group plays at is, and if you're having fun, there's nothing wrong with anything there. But I'm going to use this for kind of my math to see when we get certain features from our piety, that kind of thing. And obviously, if you're not playing a Theros campaign, feel free to ignore this stuff. All right. At level 2, we're going to take our first level in Monk, and we are going to proceed in Monk the rest of the way until level 6. So as a first level Monk, we would get Unarmored Defense and the Martial Arts feature, but both of these features don't work while we are wearing armor. That said, our Martial Arts dice still scales with our Monk level, so that is a D4 at this point. So importantly, we can't use our Dexterity instead of Strength for attacks with Monk weapons or our unarmed strikes, and we can't replace the damage dice of our unarmed strikes or monk weapons with our martial arts dice. And we also can't make a bonus action unarmed strike when we make an attack with when we use the attack action and attack with a monk weapon or an unarmed strike on our turn. So that entire feature is dead because we are using armor, and so therefore this level we don't really get much of anything from monk at all. Now, we would have a piety of 4 at this point, assuming 4 sessions and 1 piety per session. So we would have the Heliod's Devotee feature here. What this does is we can cast the Bless spell a number of times per long rest equal to our Wisdom modifier, so that'll be twice. And this would be a great thing to have at this level, especially if you don't have a cleric in your party. But again, if you're not playing a Theros campaign, you won't get access to this, but it's not going to be a super huge deal in terms of things. It just makes this character a teeny bit stronger overall. At level 3, we are going to be a second level monk, and we now have our key points. So these are our short rest resources used to fuel our monk abilities. There are 3 kind of core features that we can get that all use our bonus action. These are Flurry of Blows. So if we make an attack action on our turn with a monk weapon or an unarmed strike, we can use a bonus action, spend a key point to make 2 unarmed strikes. Now, importantly, this feature still works while you're wearing armor, and because we are a centaur, we have a natural unarmed weapon. So we can use this to make 2 bonus action attacks with our hooves, which we can still make even if we're holding a weapon and a shield because we're just kicking people with our hooves. And these will do a d6 plus our strength. And this feature works fine while you're wearing armor so long as you have a natural weapon. A natural unarmed strike replacement thing, like a lot of races. We also get the Patient Defense feature here. This lets us dodge as a bonus action by spending a key point. Potentially powerful thing to use defensively, and again, this character is going to be a pretty defensive character, so I could imagine you using this on certain turns. We also get Step of the Wind, which lets us dash as a bonus action, and because we're very fast at 40 feet, we can get extra good use out of this if we need to close. We also get the Unarmored Movement feature here, but we're wearing armor, so it doesn't do anything. And then out of the Tasha's Monk features, we get Dedicated Weapon, so we can now make any weapon that we're proficient with that lacks the heavy and special properties a monk weapon. So we can use this to make our Warhammer a monk weapon, and so now we should have no problem attacking with our Warhammer and doing Flurry of Blows attacks if we want to, although we don't have much key at this point. At level 4, we are a monk level 3, so we now have 3 key points, and we get the Deflect Missiles feature here. Now, what this does is it doesn't have any requirements actually on wearing armor, so this will work. When someone attacks us with a ranged attack, we can use our reaction, and it has to be a projectile type attack, so an arrow or throwing a rock or something like that. An energy blast from an eldritch blast or a spell attack, you can't deflect those. But we can reduce the incoming damage by 1d10 plus our monk level, and if we reduce it to 0 and have a free hand, we can potentially spend a key point to throw it back. Now, this missile return does not work very well because we can't use our martial arts dice because our martial arts feature is disabled, and our hands are going to be full with a weapon and a shield, so we're not going to use the missile return part. We also get the key field attack feature, which we might use later on this character. What this does is when we spend a key point as part of our action on our turn, we can make a bonus action attack with an unarmed strike or a monk weapon. No other requirements there. We also get our monastic tradition, our subclass here, and we're going to go with the Kensei Monk. This is out of Xanathar's, and it gives us a couple of features. The first one is Kensei weapons. So we get to pick a couple weapons. One, a melee melee weapon and 1 ranged weapon to make our Kensei weapons. The important thing is a lot of the Kensei's key abilities require you to use a Kensei weapon, so you want to pick something that you're going to use often. We're going to pick our Warhammer, and then for your ranged one, you can pick whatever you now we also get Agile Parry and Kensei Shot here. What these do with Agile Parry, if you made an attack with an unarmed strike on your turn as part of the attack action, and you're holding a Kensei weapon in one hand, you get a +2 bonus to your armor class until the start of your next turn. So we can potentially use this to be defensive just by punching or kicking people with our hooves, and then we'll get an additional bonus to our armor class. And this works even if we're holding a shield, so we can potentially stack our armor class pretty high with this, and this is going to be one of the things we're going to be using to enhance our defense. I also get the Kensei Shot feature, which we can't really use here. What this does is we can take a bonus action to activate it, and then all of our ranged attacks with a Kensei weapon for the rest of the turn at an equal at a D4 of the weapon's type. Importantly, this actually works with thrown weapons, but they have to be a Kensei weapon first. So we can potentially make use of this later on, eventually with javelins, once we get more Kensei weapons. We also get proficiency with painter's supplies and calligrapher's supplies, part of our Way of the Brush ribbon feature. Now, at this point, we would have the Heliod's Votary feature from having 12 piety to Heliod, which lets us cast Daylight once per long rest. Could be useful in the right circumstance. Level 5, we are a Monk 4, and this means we have 4 key points, and we get the Slow Fall and Quicken Healing features. Slow Fall lets you reduce falling damage with your reaction, and then Quicken Healing lets you spend some key points to heal yourself. Pretty expensive. I wouldn't generally recommend using this unless you're about to take a short rest and need some more health. But we also get our first ability score increase or feat here, and we are going to take the Crusher feat. This is a half feat out of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and we can bump our strength or constitution, and we're going to bump our strength to 18. This is kind of a core feature of this build, so let's explain a little bit about what it does. So once per turn, when we deal bludgeoning damage to a creature, we can move them 5 feet in any direction to an open square, provided they are no more than 1 size larger than us. Additionally, when we crit with bludgeoning damage, all attacks against that creature have advantage until the start of our next turn. Now, our Warhammer does bludgeoning damage, and our Hooves do bludgeoning damage, so we should be reliably able to push an enemy around once per turn. This can also be done with opportunity attacks, but we can push people around somewhat reliably to create space for ourselves or our allies, or control our enemies by pushing them into our allies' spells or off cliffs and that kind of thing. And overall, a very effective and very fun feat, and it's kind of hard to see the effectiveness of this on a spreadsheet or just doing math, but this is a very effective and very powerful thing that this character can be doing. At level 5, we're going to be a Monk 5, and we get extra attack as well as having 5 key points. So we can now make 2 attacks with our action. Importantly, this means we can make 1 attack with our Warhammer and 1 attack with our Hooves if we want to activate Agile Parry, or just 2 attacks with our Warhammer. We also get Stunning Strike. So whenever we hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack, and this can also include our Hooves, we can spend a key point to attempt to stun them. We have to make a Constitution save against our key save DC, which is 8 plus our proficiency plus our Wisdom modifier. And if they fail, they are stunned until the end of our next turn. We could potentially use this to crowd control enemies, and I would use it sparingly because we don't have that many key points, but it can be a powerful thing to do. We also get the Focused Aim feature, and what this does is we can spend 1 to 3 key points when we miss with an attack to add +2 to our attack roll for each key point we spend, and can potentially turn that miss into a hit. Both Stunning Strike and Focused Aim can potentially activate Key Field Attack, so you could potentially make a bonus action attack with your Warhammer, because it is a monk weapon, because it's our dedicated weapon. So we can potentially do that. Our Warhammer is also a monk weapon because we made it 1 with our Kensei feature. And the value of our martial arts dice does bump up to a D6 here, although we're not using it for anything just yet. So, at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. So, what are our character's tactics at this point, and what do we have going? So, our general tactics are going to be in the first round to cast Bless on ourselves and a couple of other party members, and then in round 2 and beyond, we're going to attack a couple times and then use our Flurry of Blows to make a couple of unarmed strikes with our Hooves. Pretty basic. That said, we do have a couple of kind of tactics that we can do. We can do an Agile Parry tactic where we do our Warhammer plus our Hoof attack instead of a second Warhammer attack to get an additional 2 bonus to our armor class. This will cost us a couple points of damage on average. I think it's about 3. but it does boost our armor class by 2. And if we had plate armor at this point, this would give us an AC of 22, not doing anything. We also have a tactic I like to call the crush charge. So in this case, we'll attack an enemy with our Warhammer, move them 5 feet with Crusher, so they don't provoke an opportunity attack when we move away from them, and then we can charge at a second target that's at least 30 feet away from us, so we can make an attack and then get a bonus action attack for free with our racial charge ability. We also have our keyfield attack, which we can potentially use with Stunning Strike. And again, it's important to note that you won't have Bless if you're not playing Theros, but it's maybe a couple points of difference in our average damage per round. So at this point, we have 2 Warhammer attacks with a +7 to hit and plus 1d4 damage to hit from Bless, doing 1d8 plus 6 bludgeoning damage thanks to the dueling fighting style. And we have 2 unarmed attacks with our Hooves with that same hit bonus and doing 1d6 plus 4 bludgeoning damage. So, against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 35 damage per round. And against an enemy with an AC of 15 and plus 5 to their saves, we would do 28.8 damage per round. Now, honestly, this isn't really that bad, but compared to other dedicated damage per round dealers I've made to this point, this is the worst one that I've made. If you want to see those builds, by the way, there is a link to a spreadsheet of all of my builds in this video. And if you want to see the other builds I'm looking at when I'm comparing 4 damage per round, check the damage per round and control options in the filter in the type of build column. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about magic items that this character might want to have here. And these are things you should potentially consider asking your DM for. My top priority, and something I think would be really fun, would be the Horseshoes of Speed. So this is an item, it doesn't require attunement, it's a rare item, and it says it can go on a horse or any character that has an applicable build, and I think a centaur has an applicable build to wear horseshoes. And what this does is it increases your movement speed by 30 feet. So we would have a 70-foot movement speed if we could get our hands on some Horseshoes of Speed. I would also love to get my hands on some Wraps of Unarmed Prowess on this character. This is another item. This is out of the Book of Many Things. Doesn't require attunement. And while you're wearing them, you get a bonus to the attack rolls and damage rolls of all your unarmed strikes based on the rarity of the item. The most common one, which is at uncommon rarity, is +1. So +1 to hit and +1 to damage, and also makes your unarmed strikes magical. So this would make your hoof kicks magical and enable you to hit a little more consistently with them. And then obviously, if you could get a magic warhammer and some magic heavy armor and a magic shield, those would be great things to get as well, along with fun things like a cloak of protection or anything else that your DM wants to give you. All right, but at level 7, it is time to take our final multi-class dip, and I'm going to take a dip into Ranger. So as a first level Ranger, we get proficiency in a Ranger skill, and then we're going to use the Tasha's features, so we get Favored Foe. We're not really planning on using this. Bless is better for our damage at this point. And then we get the Deft Explorer feature, the Canny, so we get expertise in a skill, as well as learning 2 languages of our choice. At level 8, we are going to be a second level Ranger, and we get a fighting style here, and actually I want to take the thrown weapon fighting style here. Now, alternatively, if you wanted to min-max for survivability, you could take defense. One of the things I envision on this character is you're going to have potentially an option to make some ranged attacks, and I want to have this in place for those situations where we can't close to melee or it's too dangerous. What this does is it gives us a +2 bonus to damage rolls with thrown weapons, and then we can draw a weapon if we're going to throw it as part of the same attack. Interestingly, this actually stacks with the dueling fighting style. So if we're holding a shield and a javelin and we throw the javelin gets +2 damage from dueling and +2 damage from thrown weapon fighting for a total flat bonus of +4. So that's an interesting thing. The damage of our thrown weapons doesn't beat our melee damage, but it is nice when we can potentially do it, and eventually we'll actually be able to use our Kensei shot feature with this. Also get the Ranger spell casting here, so we get 2 first level spell slots, and we get to learn 2 Ranger spells. The main ones I want are Hunter's Mark and Zephyr Strike. Hunter's Mark will let us add a d6 to all of our damage rolls, including our unarmed strikes, and yes, that does work. So this is a potentially 4d6 per turn to our damage per round, and is a pretty big steroid. The other one I would want is Zephyr Strike. This one lets us double our move speed and get advantage on an attack, and then deal an extra d8 damage with that attack. And then additionally, while we're concentrating on it, we don't provoke opportunity attacks. So great thing to close, and other great things as well. And overall, Really solid spell for a melee ranger. At this point, I'm assuming, again, at our 4 piety per level gain approximately, we would have 28. So we've met the 25 plus for our next piety feature. So we get Heliod's Disciple. This gives us advantage on saves against the blind condition, as well as resistance to fire damage. Not super impactful, but good in the right situation. And that's kind of the way that a lot of the kind of piety trees in the Theros campaign book. At level 9, we are going to be a 3rd level ranger. So we get the primal awareness feature out of Tasha's, so we can cast the Speak with Animals spell once per long rest without spending a spell slot, and it's on our list. And then we also get our Ranger Conclave or our subclass. And I'm actually going to take the Hunter Ranger out of the player's handbook on this character. I feel like it'd be very appropriate for the kind of the story I envision of this character, of this strong warrior of the wilds, basically, who is also a devoted champion of the god of the sun. And we get to pick from among 3 different features here to take. I want to take the Colossus Slayer feature. Basically gives us 1d8 of damage per turn, pretty much unconditionally. There are some other options here that could work well too, like Horde Breaker or Giant Slayer, depending on your campaign themes and the kind of enemies that you face. Also, I do want to say the Swarm Keeper Ranger would be fantastic here. It's got some really nice additional utility. Does a little bit less damage. I don't think it fits the flavor of my character, but mechanically it is probably more powerful. So if you want to use the Swarm Keeper, absolutely go for it. You also get a 3rd 1st level spell slot here, and we learn another spell. I would take Goodberry for some utility and healing. But at level 9, it is actually time for our next damage report. So let's talk about what has changed since last time. Well, we've gained Hunter's Mark and Colossus Slayer to add to our damage. We've gained a decent ranged option with our thrown weapon fighting javelins. We've gained Zephyr Strike from some additional utility in combat, and then gained a whole bunch of out of combat and utility and skills just from being a ranger. In terms of our tactics, we are now going to cast Hunter's Mark on our target in the first round and then attack him a couple times with our Warhammer. And then in the second round, we're going to attack a couple times and do our flurry of blows with our hooves. And then we'll apply our Colossus Slayer somewhere in. So our damage, we have 2 Warhammer attacks, each doing 1d8 plus 1d6 plus 6 bludgeoning damage. And 2 unnumbered attacks with our hooves, doing 2d6 plus 4 bludgeoning damage. And all these extra d6s are coming from Hunter's Mark. We also have our Colossus Slayer again here, so 1d8 on one of those attacks on our turn. So, against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 53.5 damage per round. And against an armor class of 16 and plus 6 to their saves, it would be 37.9. And remember, we can lower our damage per round a little bit if we want to, say, sustain our key points better with a Crush Charge type tactic, or if we want to use our Agile Parry tactic to boost our armor class. This will lower our damage per round by about 3 points at this point. Since last time, this is an increase of 18.5 points against the lower armor class and 9 points against the higher armor class. So an increase of 30 to 50%, depending on the enemy AC. And the reason why we've kind of suffered against the higher AC is Bless was helping our hit chance a bit there. Hunter's Mark is still more damage than Bless at this level, but it's not as much because our accuracy suffers a little bit. All right, at level 10, so the levels from level 10 to 13, you can kind of take in any order depending on what you feel like you need. But I'm going to take a Monk level here, so Monk 6. This gives us our 6th key point, so a little bit better sustain there. We also get Key Empowered Strikes. This is the reason why I want to take the Monk level here. By level 10, you might be encountering increasing numbers of enemies that are resistant to or immune to non-magical damage, and this will make the attacks of our hooves magical. We also get the Magic Kensei weapons feature here. So all of our Kensei weapons now count as magical as well for overcoming that immunity. We also get the Deft Strike feature here out of Kensei Monk, which once per turn, I think on our turns only, when we deal damage with a Kensei weapon, we can spend a key point to deal an additional damage equal to 1 roll of our martial arts dice. So this is not as much damage as a flurry of blows, but it is an additional d6 of damage that we can throw on. I'm not planning on using this at this point because I don't consider it to be sustainable for a whole combat. Because most combats are going to last about 3, 4, 5 rounds, and so we don't have enough key points to spend 2 key points a turn yet on Flurry of Blows and this, so I'm not going to add this to our damage calculations. But if you want to use this for burst, you absolutely can. We also get to have an additional Kensei weapon here, and I want to take the Javelin, although you could also take the Light Hammer. But importantly, this enables that ranged option with our Kensei shot, and we can now do that cool thrown weapon fighting dueling combo with our thrown weapons. Now, the reason the javelin over the light hammer, it does a little more damage. The light hammer does do bludgeoning damage and can work with crusher. So if you want to do a little bit less damage but have that additional utility, absolutely take light hammers instead. I just think that having the quiver of javelins on my back and my warhammer in my plate armor with my shield would kind of fit the vibe of the character I want to make. So that's why we're going with the javelins here. At level 11, we're going to take a detour into fighter. So we're going to take a second level in fighter. This gives us action surge. So once per short rest, we can get an extra action on our turn. And you can use this for burst when required. This isn't a burst build, but this will enable you to pump out some more damage when you need to, or potentially have defensive benefits. And it recharges on a short rest, the same interval as all of our key points. Level 12, we are going to be a third level fighter, and this means we get our martial archetype, and I'm going to go with the Battlemaster. This probably was pretty obvious. I would hope it's not, too obscure. This gives us the combat superiority feature, so we get 4 superiority dice that are d8s we can use to field 3 maneuvers of our choice. Now, the 3 I want on this character are very specific, and we can only use 1 maneuver per attack. But the ones I want are first, trip attack. This is one I love to have on melee characters. When we hit an enemy with an attack, we can force them to make a strength save against our maneuver DC. Our maneuver DC is 8 plus our strength modifier plus our proficiency modifier. You can also use your dex, but we're going to use strength on this character because it's higher. And if they are large or smaller, they fall prone if they fail to save, and we can use this potentially to set up advantage for all of our follow-up attacks on that turn. Going forward, I'm going to be assuming that we're using this on our first attack each turn in combat, and then our enemy fails their save against it to give us advantage on all of our other attacks. This will potentially boost our damage per round, and I am planning on using it for my math on this character. That said, the other 2 options that I'm going to take are very good. These are menacing attack. This forces them to make a wisdom save against our maneuver save DC, does some extra damage, and if they fail, they're frightened of us. What this does is they can't willingly move closer to us, and they have disadvantage on all attack rolls and ability checks while they can see us, and we're in their line of sight. So a cool thing that you can do with this is you can hit an enemy, menace them, and if they fail and become frightened of you, you can then use your crusher to push them back because you did bludgeoning damage to them, and now they can't approach you. So you can use your positioning with the fear effect to control them by locking down and limiting where they can move. You can use this potentially to make them skip their turn because they might not be able to approach any of your allies, and they might not be able to approach you. And if they don't have a good enough melee reach, they can't do anything. We're also going to take pushing attack, very similar to trip attack in terms of size requirement and the strength save. But if they fail their save, we get to push them 10 feet, and we can stack this with our crusher to get a 15-foot push, which we might be able to use to knock an enemy off a cliff or into a hazard. And having that force move overall, I just think is super fun. Also get Student of War here, so proficiency with a set of Artisan's tools. Depending on your background, I might take Smith's tools or something else. Doesn't really matter. This is a ribbon feature. And finally, at level 13, this is our last level before our next damage report, we're going to be a 4th level Ranger. You could also be a 4th level Fighter here, but I want to be closer to the higher level Ranger features if you do want to take them, and 2nd level Ranger spells are actually really good. And we get our next ability score increase or feat here. I'm going to take +2 strength, which will bump our strength to 18. Now, at this point, you would probably have had 50 or more sessions, if not immediately upon hitting level 13 or before or just shortly after. So our Piety to Heliod should be 50 plus. So we should have the Champion of the Sun feature, and this increases our strength or another one of our stats. I think it's our Wisdom by 2, and the cap of that stat by 2 as well. Now, we're going to take +2 strength. So now at this level, we've bumped our strength from 18 to 22, which is pretty massive. And again, if you're not playing a Theros campaign, you'll just have 20 strength. It's not that big of a deal in terms of our damage per round. It's a difference of about 4 points. But that said, this will help our save DCs quite a bit for our Battlemaster maneuvers. So, level 13 is time for our next damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, quite a bit, actually. We've gained Death Strike for some potential extra burst. We've gained kind of a throwing option tech with our Kensei shot and throwing javelins. We've gained Key and Power strikes and magical Kensei weapons, so all our attacks are magical now. We've gained Action Surge to potentially do some extra burst. We've gained Battlemaster maneuvers, which will help enormously, including giving us advantage with trip attack. And then our strength is now at 22, which is pretty monstrous. So our tactics, they haven't really changed. We're still going to cast Hunter's Mark on our target and attack a couple times in the first round. Now we're going to be trip attacking and then follow-up attacking with our Warhammer and Flurry of Blows. Although if you want to do a little bit less damage per round, again by about 3 points, you could make a third hoof attack instead of that second Warhammer attack to potentially get +2 AC with Agile Parry. And we still, of course, have the Crush Charge option as well. And if you have a Horseshoes of Speed, you can actually Crush Charge your own target. You hit them, knock them back up 25 feet, move 30 feet directly toward them. It takes 55 speed of movement to do that. But if you have Horseshoes of Speed, you'll be at 70. So you could absolutely do that to not have to spend key points to get a bonus action attack. So we have 2 attacks with our Warhammer at this point, each with a +11 to hit, doing 1d8 plus 1d6 plus 8 bludgeoning damage. And our second one each turn is going to have advantage because of trip attack. I'm making that assumption. And I've made it on all my other builds, so to be fair for comparison, I am going to do it here. Then we have a couple unarmed attacks with our Hooves, each with a +11 to hit with advantage because I'm assuming our target is prone, doing 2d6 plus 6 bludgeoning damage. We have our trip attack for our first attack each round. We're going to plan on using 1 superiority dice per turn in combat. And then we have Colossus Slayer, which we're going to apply to an attack after we've knocked them prone because we potentially want to get a crit. And if we get a crit, we can double our Colossus Slayer damage. So against an enemy with an armor class of 10 and no bonus to their saves, we would do 69, nice, 0.2 damage per round. And against an enemy with an armor class of 17, we would do 62.2 damage per round. And since last time, this is an increase of 15 to 24 points or 30 to 60%, depending on the enemy's armor class. Interestingly here, we've already been really accurate against low armor class enemies for a while. So we've seen a pretty massive spike in our damage against higher armor classes because of the massive bump to strength that we got. Now, compared to my other builds at this point, we have kind of caught some of the martial builds, or we're pretty close to them, but we're pretty much still bottom of the pack here, and nothing short of, going to a great weapon master or sharpshooter type build on this character is really going to change that. But that said, we are still very effective overall. And I'm actually pretty pleased with how survivable this character would be, and just kind of what a cool vibe of being basically a knight in shining armor on horseback, except you are the horseback. All right, level 14, we're going to bounce around a bit here to collect some more feats. So I'm going to take a level in fighter here, and I'm going to take resilient wisdom and bump my wisdom to 15. And this also gives us proficiency in wisdom saves, which I feel would be important entering higher tiers of play just for our survivability. At level 15, we are going to be a monk 7, and I'm going to go monk the rest of the way to level 17 on this character. So we now have 7 key points. We get the evasion feature. So when we make a dexterity saving throw, if we would take half damage and we pass the save, we take no damage. And if we fail the save, we only take half damage instead of full damage. This can make us very resilient against a lot of dexterity type things. And even though we don't have a super good dex score or proficiency in dex saves, I feel like this kind of shores that up. And so that's why I wanted to prioritize the wisdom saves over the dex. At level 8, we are going to be a monk level 8. So we now have 8 key points, and from here on, I will consider Death Strike to be sustainable. So I'm going to use it in combat. We have enough key points that we can spend 2 key points per turn on average, and still have enough for a potential 4-round encounter. Of course, honestly, using Stunning Strike might be better here, especially because we get another ability score increase or feat. And I'm going to bump our Dexterity and our Wisdom each by 1 to get them to 14 and 16. So our key save DC here is now a little better. So honestly, you might be wanting to do Stunning Strikes against key targets. Finally, at level 17, we are going to be a monk level 9, which means we get 9 key points, and we get the unarmored movement improvement feature. Now, what this does is on your turn, this lets you move across vertical surfaces or across liquids without falling. So you can run on walls and that kind of thing. Interestingly, this improvement works while you're wearing armor. So even though we had no climb speed as a centaur, we can now run across walls or up trees instead. And this is a kind of a fun and funny thing. And I think it's interesting that this feature still works while wearing armor. All right, so at level 17 is time for our final damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, we've mainly gained defensive features here. So our key pool is now large enough to potentially Death Strike and attempt 1 Stunning Strike per turn in addition to Flurry of Blows. We've gained evasion to fortify our dex saves. We've bumped our dex and wisdom to 14 and 16, and we've gained proficiency in wisdom saves. And our unarmored movement has improved, so we can now run on walls or water on our turn without falling in. Tactics-wise, our tactics haven't changed since last time, although we are now planning on applying Death Strike every turn. Our numbers haven't really changed. We could gain an additional +1 to hit on our attacks thanks to being a level 17 character, and we have an additional D6 rider once per turn from Death Strike. So against an enemy with an armor class of 10, we would do 73 damage per round. Against an enemy with an AC of 18, it would be 65.9. And since last time, this is an increase of 3.7 to 3.8 points, or 5 to 6%. Not a very big increase, but this is basically just that 3.5 damage on average from the Death Strike. So, all that said, it is time to summarize. So, first, what is the overall score of this build? Now, to calculate this, I take all of our numbers at all of our damage reports, and I average them together into one number. So for this character, that is a 53.2. And if you're going to be making this character without the Theros benefits, it's going to be a 50.0 flat. Now, compared to my other dedicated damage per rounds I've made to date, including my control builds that have damage per round options, this is the worst build I've made on my spreadsheet. That said, I feel like this character's damage per round and survivability and their ability to control targets with Stunning Strike or combining Crusher with Menacing Strike or just the force movement they have, overall would be a very effective and very fun character to play. And so even though the damage per round isn't crazy, I feel like even though we are an armored monk and not using a lot of monk features, we've still made a pretty effective character. So that said, what about taking this character to level 20? I would probably honestly do Ranger 7 on this character. This gives us second level Ranger spells. We get Deft Explorer Roving, which is another 5 feet of movement speed, and we gain a climb speed and swimming speed equal to our walking speed. So we can now climb and swim even though we're a centaur, which was kind of cool. And then we also get a 7th level feature out of Hunter. I would take multi-attack defense for a +4 bonus to our armor class against any follow-up attacks from the same creature on the same turn. You could also do Monk 12, depends on your campaign and your magic items and that kind of thing that you're given. You could even do, Fighter 6, Monk 10, or any combination of things like that. Now, how does this compare to actually being an unarmored monk? So you would be Dex primary if you wanted to be an unarmored monk. It does a bit more damage later, but not by much. And it's much worse defensively, actually. You have to invest pretty heavily into dexterity and wisdom, in addition to taking Crusher and Con. This build, the version I made that came out to be the best ended up being mostly monk. Kind of skipped the ranger levels and used being a champion of Nylea to get Hunter's Mark instead of the ranger stuff. But overall, you could do a dex version. I think the strength version is super cool. Although that said, you could do a pretty effective centaur fighter and skip the monk stuff. But I feel like the monk stuff contributes an extra layer of defensiveness and control, as well as the powerful bonus action Hooves things, especially at low levels, that those other classes would lack. Another cool thing I really like about this character is that Crusher works on almost everything. So it works on our unarmed hoof attacks. It works on our Warhammer attacks. If we're using a light hammer as our throwing option, it'll work with those. And so we can bounce enemies all over the place all the time. And this would be a very fun character to play with other characters in the party that have area of effects or like incorporating force movement in their tactics, because we can kind of work with them and kind of be an amplifier for their tactics. We have the Crusher plus menacing option for control and Crusher plus pushing attack to just further push enemies. And overall, we are very mobile and flexible in our tactics. We have a variety of different things that we can do, whether it's agile parry or our crush charge tactic. We have action surge for some extra burst when required to kill key targets. We also have Death Strike we can use for extra burst if needed, and Stunning Strike to control targets. This character also has a pretty darn solid defense between a high armor class, having the evasion feature, our save proficiencies, and our heroic destiny feature. So overall, thanks for watching. This has been our Crushing Hooves Armored Monk for Mystic Odyssey of Theros. I hope you enjoyed. This was a really fun build for me to make, both conceptually and mechanically, trying to figure out how to make a strength armored monk work. And I think I've always wanted to kind of design a centaur build that wasn't like I run really fast build. And I think this build does a good job of that. And there are also some pretty unique magic item interaction options for centaurs, thanks to things like the Horseshoes of Speed. So My name is Nathan, and if you've enjoyed, again, please hit that subscribe button, and we might be able to make that 200 subscriber video happen sooner rather than later. It's been a joy and a pleasure sharing this with all of you, and I will see you next time.